You know that moment when the person you sacrificed everything for throws you out like yesterday's garbage the second you become inconvenient? That moment when you realize 30 years of unconditional love meant absolutely nothing when it came time for them to return the favor? Well, I'm about to tell you about my moment. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand how my daughter Victoria went from smugly kicking me out of her house to desperately begging me to take her back in less than 48 hours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Whitmore, and I'm 71 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed that being a good mother meant giving everything you had to your children, even when it meant you had nothing left for yourself. I thought love meant sacrifice, without question, support without boundaries, and forgiveness without accountability. I was wrong about all of it. And it took losing everything I thought I had to discover what I'd been hiding from everyone, including myself. The phone call that changed everything came on a gray Tuesday morning in March, cutting through the peaceful silence of my small apartment in Willowbrook Heights. I'd been living there for 6 months, ever since the devastating news that my retirement fund had been wiped out by my financial advisor's embezzlement scheme. The FBI had arrested him, but my $400,000 nest egg was gone, vanished into offshore accounts that would take years to recover, if ever. Victoria's name flashed on my outdated flip phone, and my heart did that little skip it always did when one of my children called. At 71, after losing my husband Thomas 3 years earlier, these calls from my busy adult children felt like lifelines to a world that seemed to be moving on without me. "Mom, we need to talk." Victoria's voice was sharp, businesslike, the tone she used at her real estate firm when dealing with difficult clients. There was no warmth, no, "How are you feeling today?" or "Are you managing okay?" Just straight to business. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" I settled into my worn armchair, the same one Thomas and I had bought 40 years ago, one of the few pieces of furniture that had made it to my downsized apartment. "It's about your living situation, Mom. We can't keep this up anymore." My blood went cold. For the past 6 months, since I'd lost my retirement savings, Victoria and her husband Derek had been helping me pay rent on my modest one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't much, $800 a month, but on my Social Security alone, it was impossible to manage. They'd insisted it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet, or until the legal case against my financial advisor was resolved. "I don't understand. Victoria, has something happened? Are you and Derek having financial troubles?" "Mom, be realistic. Derek got passed over for that promotion, and with the kids starting college soon, we need every penny we can get. We can't keep subsidizing your lifestyle when we have our own family to think about, subsidizing my lifestyle." I stared around my tiny apartment with its secondhand furniture and bargain store decorations. My lifestyle consisted of clipping, coupons, buying generic groceries, and turning the heat down to 65 degrees to save money. "What are you suggesting, sweetheart? We've found you a place at Sunset Manor. It's a nice facility, clean, good staff. Your Social Security will cover most of it, and we can help with the difference for the first few months until you adjust." Sunset Manor. I knew the place. A state-funded nursing home on the outskirts of Millfield, 40 minutes away from everything I knew. The kind of place where people went when their families couldn't be bothered to care for them anymore. "Victoria, I don't need a nursing home. I'm perfectly capable of living independently. I just need a little help with the rent until what, Mom? Until you magically get your money back? The lawyer already told us it could take years, and that's if you get anything at all. We can't keep throwing good money after bad. Throwing good money after bad. That's what I'd become to my daughter, a bad investment." "I raised you in that house for 18 years, I said quietly. "I worked 2 jobs after your father died so you could stay in the same school district. I paid for your college, your wedding, helped with the down payment on your first house. Surely we can work something out, That was different, Mom. That was your job as a parent. We didn't ask to be born. But we're adults now with our own responsibilities. You can't expect us to take care of you forever. The words hit me like physical blows. Everything I'd sacrificed, every extra shift I'd worked, every vacation I'd skipped to give her opportunities, it had all been reduced to your job as a parent. What about Marcus? I asked, grasping for hope. My son lived in Denver, had a successful law practice. Surely he could help. Marcus agrees with us. He said it's not fair to expect us to carry this burden when there are facilities designed exactly for this situation. He'll visit you at Sunset Manor when he can. When he can. Which meant never. The thing is, Mom, we need you out of the apartment by Friday. The new residents are moving in on Saturday and we've already committed to them. Friday. Today was Tuesday. They were giving me 3 days to pack up my entire life and move into a nursing home. Victoria, that's not enough time. I need to sort through my things, arrange transportation. We've hired movers for Thursday. They'll pack up your essentials and put everything else in storage. Don't worry about the details. We've handled everything. They'd handled everything. They'd made decisions about my life, my belongings, my future, without consulting me at all. I was just expected to go along with their plan like a piece of furniture being relocated. I see, I said, though I didn't see anything clearly anymore. The daughter I'd raised to be strong and independent had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone cold and calculating who saw her own mother as a financial burden to be managed rather than a person to be loved. It's for the best, Mom. You'll see. Sunset Manor has activities, people your own age to socialize with. You might actually be happier there. Happier. She was convinced I'd be happier warehoused with other forgotten elderly people, stripped of my independence and dignity, because it was more convenient for her budget. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Rage. Pure, clean, clarifying rage at the injustice of it all. At the casual cruelty of children who had benefited from every sacrifice I'd made but couldn't spare $800 a month to keep their mother in basic dignity. But what Victoria didn't know, what no one knew, was that Margaret Whitmore had a secret that would change everything in ways she couldn't imagine. As I sat there planning my forced departure, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. In 3 days, Victoria would get exactly what she wanted, her mother out of her hair and off her budget. But she was also about to learn a lesson about assumptions, about taking people for granted, and about what happens when you underestimate someone you think you know completely. Because while I was about to lose my tiny apartment, Victoria was about to lose something far more valuable. And unlike my situation, hers would be entirely her own doing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The whole nightmare had started, 8 months earlier, with a phone call that I thought was going to be good news. Harold Pemberton, my financial advisor for over 15 years, was calling with what he described as exciting investment opportunities that could double my retirement savings within 2 years. Margaret, you've been such a loyal client, Harold had said in that smooth, confident voice that had always made me feel like I was in capable hands. I have access to some exclusive investment vehicles that are only available to my most trusted clients. With Thomas gone and your fixed income situation, I really think this could secure your future in ways traditional investments simply can't. I should have been suspicious, should have asked more questions, should have gotten a second opinion. But Harold had managed my money successfully for over a decade. He'd helped Thomas and me buy our house, plan for retirement, even navigate the financial chaos after Thomas's cancer treatments. When he spoke, I listened. What kind of investments are we talking about? I'd asked, sitting in his polished office in downtown Millfield, surrounded by certificates and awards that proclaimed Harold Pemberton as Financial Advisor of the Year 3 times running. international currency markets, some emerging technology, funds, a few carefully selected real estate ventures in developing markets. The returns are exceptional, but they require a significant initial investment to access the premium tiers. He showed me charts and graphs, projections that made my modest $400,000 retirement fund look like it could grow to over $800,000 within 24 months. At 70 years old, facing the reality of rising healthcare costs and an uncertain economy, that kind of security seemed like a miracle. The minimum investment for the premium tier is $350,000, Harold explained. It's substantial, but Margaret, at your age, this could be the difference between comfortable retirement and struggling to make ends meet. And with Victoria and Marcus, both doing well, you have that family safety net if anything unexpected happens. Family safety net. Those words should have been a red flag, the suggestion that I might need my children's financial support. But instead, they felt reassuring. Of course, my children would help if needed. That's what families did for each other, right? I signed the papers that afternoon, authorizing Harold to move $350,000 of my retirement savings into his exclusive investment portfolio. I kept $50,000 in traditional accounts for immediate expenses, feeling proud of my financial wisdom and looking forward to the security those projected returns would bring. For 3 months, everything looked perfect. Harold sent monthly statements, showing steady growth, returns that exceeded even his optimistic projections. My $350,000 had grown to $425,000, then $450,000. I felt like the smartest investor in Millfield, but then the statements stopped coming. When I called Harold's office in December, I got a recorded message saying the number was no longer in service. When I drove to his building, I found empty offices with for lease signs in the windows. Harold Pemberton, financial advisor of the year, had vanished along with my life savings. The FBI investigation that followed revealed the scope of Harold's operation. Over $12 million stolen from 37 clients, most of them elderly retirees who had trusted him with their life savings. The exclusive investment portfolio was nothing more than Harold's personal spending account, funding his luxury cars, his vacation home in Costa Rica, and his gambling addiction. The good news, Agent Jennifer Walsh told me during one of our many interviews, is that we've frozen some of his assets. The bad news is that most of the money appears to have been moved offshore. Recovery could take years, and there's no guarantee you'll get back more than pennies on the dollar. Pennies on the dollar. 35 years of careful saving, reduced to loose change. That's when I had to swallow my pride and call Victoria. The conversation still made my stomach clench when I remembered it. "Mom, how could you be so careless?" she'd said after I explained what happened. "Didn't you know the old saying about things that seem too good to be true? Why didn't you consult Marcus? He's a lawyer, for crying out loud." I trusted Harold. He'd never given me reason not to. Well, trust doesn't pay rent, does it? God, Mom, this is such a mess. Derek and I are barely keeping our heads above water as it is, and now we have to figure out how to support you too. Support me? The way she said it made it sound like I'd deliberately created this burden just to inconvenience her. But they had stepped up initially. Victoria and Derek agreed to help with my rent while I downsized from the family home to a small apartment. They'd even helped me sell furniture and belongings to reduce my expenses. For a few months, I thought maybe this crisis would actually bring us closer together. I was wrong. The first signs of resentment appeared around month 3. Victoria started making comments about my expensive tastes when she saw me buying name brand groceries instead of generic. Derek made jokes about his dependent mother-in-law when we were at family gatherings, little digs that cut deeper each time. "We're not a charity, Mom," Victoria had said during one particularly tense conversation. "We need to see you making efforts to be more self-sufficient. Maybe you could get a part-time job or look into government assistance programs." A part-time job. At 71. After working for 45 years and raising 2 children as a single mother after Thomas's death. After sacrificing my own needs countless times to ensure Victoria and Marcus had every opportunity I could give them. Marcus, my lawyer son in Denver, was even less sympathetic during our phone calls. "Mom, you need to be realistic about your situation," he'd said during our last conversation. "Victoria and Derek can't support you indefinitely. You're going to have to make some hard choices about your lifestyle expectations." Lifestyle expectations? Like expecting to live independently in a modest apartment instead of being warehoused in a state facility, but the final straw had come. 2 weeks ago, when I overheard Victoria talking to Derek in their kitchen during what I thought was a pleasant family dinner. "I'm so tired of this guilt trip," Victoria was saying. "Every month it's the same thing. Rent money, grocery money, utility bills. When does it end? My friends are planning European vacations and we're stuck supporting your mother because she was too naive to protect her own money." "Maybe it's time to look at other options," Derek had replied. "My cousin went through this with his dad. Sometimes the kindest thing is to help them transition to appropriate care before they become completely dependent." Appropriate care. Completely dependent. They were talking about me like I was a burden to be managed, not a person who had given everything to ensure their success and happiness. That conversation had planted the seed of what became Tuesday's phone call. The decision to ship me off to Sunset Manor so they could return to their regularly scheduled life without the inconvenience of supporting the woman who had supported them their entire lives. As I sat in my apartment that Tuesday evening, surrounded by the boxes I'd already started packing, I thought about the irony of my situation. Victoria and Derek thought they knew exactly who Margaret Whitmore was, a naive old woman who'd made a costly mistake and now needed to be managed like a problem, to be solved. They had no idea that the woman they were so eager to dispose of had resources they couldn't imagine. Resources that had been hidden so well that even Harold Pemberton's thorough financial investigation had never uncovered them. Tomorrow, I would start making some phone calls of my own. And by Friday, when Victoria expected me to meekly shuffle off to Sunset Manor with my tail between my legs, she was going to get the surprise of her life because Margaret Whitmore had been keeping secrets for 30 years. And it was time to let them out. Wednesday morning arrived with a knock on my door at 7:30 a.m. I opened it to find Derek standing there with a clipboard and a look of barely concealed impatience, like a landlord conducting an eviction inspection. "Morning, Margaret. Victoria sent me over to do a quick inventory of your belongings so we can figure out what's worth keeping and what should just be donated." He walked past me into my small living room without waiting for an invitation, already scanning the space with calculating eyes. "I wasn't expecting you so early," I said, tightening my bathrobe around me. "Victoria said the movers weren't coming until tomorrow." "Change of plans. They can come today if we're ready, which would save us money on storage fees. Victoria's trying to keep costs down." He flipped through papers on his clipboard. "She's made a list of essentials you'll need at Sunset Manor. 1 suitcase of clothes, some toiletries, maybe a few small personal items. The room is pretty small, so we have to be realistic about what fits. 1 suitcase. 71 years of life reduced to 1 suitcase." Derek moved through my apartment like an appraiser, making notes. "This furniture is all pretty outdated. The donation center will probably take it, but I doubt any of it's worth selling. The TV's too old to be worth anything." He paused in front of Thomas's bookshelf, filled with his collection of first edition mysteries. "These books are just taking up space. I'll have the movers put them straight into the donation pile." "Those were my husband's books," I said quietly. "Some of them are quite valuable and they have sentimental—" "Margaret, you have to be practical. There's no room for sentimentality when you're downsizing this drastically. Besides, when are you realistically going to read them? Sunset Manor has a library." He continued his inventory, dismissing 40 years of memories with casual efficiency. "My grandmother's china set? Too fragile for a nursing home environment. Thomas's military medals. What would you do with them in your room? The photo albums, documenting Victoria and Marcus's childhood? Too bulky, and everything's digital now anyway. With each dismissal, I felt pieces of my history being erased, deemed unworthy of preservation by someone who had been part of my family for less than 15 years. What about my jewelry? I asked, thinking of my modest collection stored in the bedroom dresser. Derek's expression shifted slightly, showing the first real interest he'd displayed all morning. Well, some of that might have actual value. Victoria mentioned you have some pieces from Thomas's mother. We should probably have those appraised, see if they're worth selling to help with your ongoing expenses. Victoria had been discussing my jewelry with Derek, planning to liquidate even the small treasures I'd inherited from Thomas's family, things that were meant to be passed down to future generations, not sold to subsidize my care. Those pieces are meant for Victoria and Marcus eventually, I said. Eventually might need to be now, Margaret. Your situation has changed. Holding on to valuable assets while expecting your children to support you financially doesn't make much sense, does it? The phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Victoria's voice was crisp and businesslike when I answered. Mom, Derek's there doing the inventory, right? Good. I've been on the phone with Sunset Manor this morning, and there are a few additional things we need to discuss. What kind of things? Well, the basic room rate covers your bed and meals, but there are extra charges for things like laundry service, cable TV, and participation in activities. If you want any of those amenities, we need to talk about how you're going to cover the additional costs. Additional costs. She was nickel and diming my existence at a state nursing home. How much are we talking about? About $300 a month extra for the full package, which would leave you nothing from your Social Security for personal expenses like toiletries, clothes, or any little extras you might want. The implication was clear. If I wanted basic dignity and comfort, I'd need to ask my children for money every month. They were setting up a system where I'd be completely dependent on their generosity for anything beyond the absolute bare minimum. There's another option, Victoria continued. If you're willing to be more flexible about your accommodations, there's a shared room available that would reduce your monthly costs by $200. You'd have a roommate, and the space is smaller, but it might be more financially manageable. A shared room. She wanted me to share a tiny space with a stranger to save money. Victoria, I've lived independently my entire adult life. Surely I can maintain some privacy and dignity. Mom, dignity is a luxury you can't afford right now. We're trying to find solutions that work within your actual financial situation, not the situation you wish you had. Derek held up his hand, gesturing for the phone. I handed it to him, listening to his side of the conversation. She's being pretty, resistant to the practical suggestions, he told Victoria, still acting like she has choices she doesn't have. No, she doesn't seem to understand the financial reality. Right, exactly. Maybe if it comes from Marcus, she'll be more receptive to the hard truths. He handed the phone back to me. Victoria wants to conference Marcus in. He has some things to say about your options. The three-way call that followed was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. Marcus, speaking from his successful law practice in Denver, laid out my situation with the cold precision of a legal brief. Mom, let me be very clear about your financial position. Your Social Security is $1,847 per month. Sunset Manor's basic rate is $1,650. That leaves you $197 for everything else. Clothing, personal care items, any medical expenses not covered by Medicare, phone service, everything. You are, by any definition, indigent. Indigent. My son, whom I'd put through law school by working double shifts at the hospital, was calling me indigent. Victoria and Derek have been subsidizing your lifestyle to the tune of nearly $15,000 over the past 6 months. That's money they need for their own family's future. Emma starts college next year, and James isn't far behind. They can't continue to drain their children's college fund to support choices you make. Choices I make, as if I'd chosen to be defrauded. By Harold Pemberton. Marcus, I understand the financial pressure, but do you? Because your resistance to practical solutions suggests otherwise. You're acting like someone who still has options, like someone who can afford to be choosy about accommodations and amenities. That person doesn't exist anymore, Mom. The sooner you accept that, the better for everyone. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you take the shared room, skip the extra services, and focus on adjusting to your new reality. And I'm suggesting you sign over power of attorney to Victoria so she can manage your financial affairs more efficiently. No offense, but your track record with financial decisions isn't exactly stellar. Power of attorney. They wanted legal control over every aspect of my life. I don't think that's necessary, Marcus. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Are you? Because 6 months ago you turned a comfortable retirement into complete dependence on your children's charity. That doesn't inspire confidence in your judgment. Derek was nodding along with Marcus's words, making more notes on his clipboard. I realized they'd planned this conversation, coordinated their approach to break down any resistance I might have to their plans. There's one more thing. Victoria's voice cut through my thoughts. Sunset Manor requires a guarantor for residents who might need additional financial support. Someone who agrees to cover any costs beyond what your Social Security provides. I thought you said you couldn't afford to help anymore. We can't afford open-ended support, but we're willing to serve as guarantors for basic care, with strict limits. Any extras, any additional needs, any emergency expenses, those would have to be covered by liquidating your remaining assets. My remaining assets. The jewelry, Thomas's books, anything else of value Derek had identified during his inventory. They were creating a system where every comfort, every dignity, every small pleasure would require selling another piece of my history. And if I refused these arrangements? The silence on the phone was answer enough, but Marcus spelled it out. Anyway, then you'll need to find alternative arrangements that don't involve our financial support, which, given your current situation, would likely mean applying for emergency state assistance and accepting whatever placement they offer, which would almost certainly be less comfortable than Sunset Manor. They had me trapped. Accept their conditions and surrender my independence and dignity, or face complete abandonment and whatever institutional care the state might provide. As the phone call ended and Derek resumed his inventory, dismissing decades of memories with mechanical efficiency, I felt something crystallize in my chest. Not despair, though that would have been understandable. Not even anger, though that was certainly present. It was clarity. Perfect, diamond-hard clarity about exactly who my children had become and exactly what my life meant to them. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that Margaret Whitmore, the woman they were so eager to dispose of, was exactly who she appeared to be, a broke, powerless, elderly woman with no options and no resources. Tomorrow, when those movers arrived, they were going to discover just how wrong they were, because some secrets are worth keeping for 30 years. Especially when the people trying to destroy your life have no idea they exist. That evening, my neighbor Agnes Kowalski knocked on my door with a casserole dish and concern etched deep in her weathered face. Agnes had lived next door for 12 years, ever since she'd moved to Willowbrook Heights after her own husband passed. We'd developed the kind of friendship that forms between widows who understand each other's particular brand of loneliness. Margaret, honey, I couldn't help but notice all the commotion today. That young man was here for hours, and I heard some raised voices. She set the casserole on my kitchen counter and studied my face with the sharp eyes of someone who'd raised 6 children and buried 2 husbands. What's going on? I found myself telling Agnes everything. The phone call from Victoria, the forced move to Sunset Manor, Derek's dismissive inventory of my life's possessions. With each detail, her expression grew more horrified. They're doing what? Agnes sat heavily in my kitchen chair, her voice rising with indignation. Margaret, that's elder abuse. You know that, right? They can't just force you into a nursing home against your will. They're not forcing me exactly. They're just making it impossible for me to refuse. That's the same thing, honey. Listen to me. I went through something similar with my oldest son, Robert. After my second husband died, Robert thought he knew what was best for me. Started making decisions about my life, my money, my living situation. Know what I did? I shook my head, though I suspected Agnes was about to deliver one of her legendary pieces of advice. I told him to go to hell, in those exact words. And you know what happened? He backed down, because bullies, even family bullies, only push as hard as you let them. Agnes leaned forward, gripping my hand with surprising strength. Margaret, you're not some helpless old lady. You're a registered nurse who worked for 40 years. You raised 2 children alone after Thomas died. You managed a household, made financial decisions, solved problems every single day. What happened with that crooked financial advisor doesn't erase any of that. But I don't have any money left, Agnes. Without Victoria and Derek's help. Without their help, what? You'd figure something out, just like you always have. You think you're the first widow who ever faced financial hardship? You think generations of women before us just rolled over and died when things got tough? Her words stung because they carried truth I wasn't ready to face. When had I become so dependent on other people's approval and support? When had I started believing that needing help meant surrendering all control over my own life? Besides, Agnes continued, something about this whole situation doesn't smell right to me. Your daughter's awfully eager to get you out of the picture, isn't she? And all this talk about your financial situation. How much do they really know about your actual resources? I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Agnes had touched on something I'd been carefully avoiding thinking about. They know what Harold stole. They know about my Social Security. And is that everything, Margaret? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to explore. Agnes had always been perceptive, able to read between the lines in ways that made people uncomfortable. I don't know what you mean. I mean that in 12 years of friendship, you've never once seemed like someone who put all her eggs in one basket. I mean that your late husband was the kind of man who planned for every contingency. I mean that you've never acted like someone whose entire financial security depended on a single investment account. Agnes studied my face carefully. And I mean that someone who's really broke doesn't spend 20 minutes every morning checking a safe deposit box key like it's a rosary. My blood went cold. I hadn't realized Agnes had noticed my morning routine, the small ritual of touching the key I wore on a chain around my neck, hidden beneath my clothes. A habit that had become automatic over the 30 years since Thomas had given it to me with specific instructions I'd never shared with anyone. Agnes, you don't have to tell me anything, honey. But you might want to ask yourself why you're so quick to believe you're helpless when you've got resources your own family doesn't know about. Before I could respond, there was another knock at my door. Through the peephole, I saw Marcus standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable and overdressed in his expensive suit and tie. He must have caught the first flight from Denver after our phone call. Margaret, we need to talk. Marcus barely glanced at Agnes as he entered, his lawyer's demeanor in full effect. I've been thinking about our conversation today, and I realize we might have come across as harsh. That wasn't our intention. Agnes stood up slowly, fixing Marcus with the kind of look she used to give her own children when they'd disappointed her. You must be the son, the one who called his mother indigent on the phone today. Marcus's face flushed. I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met. Agnes Kowalski. I live next door, and I've been listening to your mother cry herself to sleep for the past 6 months while you and your sister figured out how to dispose of her most conveniently. Mrs. Kowalski, I appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter. Family matter? Agnes's voice could have cut glass. Son, I've watched. Real families deal with hard times. Real families don't inventory their mother's belongings like she's already dead. Real families don't pressure elderly parents into signing away their legal rights. And real families sure as hell don't use words like indigent and charity case when talking about the woman who sacrificed everything to raise them. Marcus looked genuinely taken aback by Agnes's directness. In his professional world, people probably didn't challenge him so bluntly. "You don't understand the full situation," he said stiffly. "My mother made poor financial decisions that have created a crisis for everyone involved. We're trying to find solutions that work within the reality of her circumstances." Her circumstances? Agnes stepped closer to Marcus, all 5 feet of her radiating maternal fury. "Let me tell you about circumstances, counselor. Your mother worked double shifts to put you through law school. She took out a second mortgage on her house to help with your sister's wedding. She gave up her own retirement dreams to make sure you both had every advantage. And now that she needs help, you're treating her like a burden to be managed rather than a person to be loved." I watched this exchange with a mixture of gratitude and mortification. Agnes was fighting battles I should have been fighting myself, saying things I should have had the courage to say. "Mrs. Kowalski, you're oversimplifying a complex situation. No, son, you're overcomplicating a simple one. Your mother needs support and respect, not management and manipulation. The fact that you can't see the difference tells me everything I need to know about the kind of man you've become." Marcus turned to me, clearly hoping to redirect the conversation. "Mom, can we please discuss this privately? I drove 6 hours to have this conversation with you." "You drove 6 hours to pressure an elderly woman into signing legal documents," Agnes corrected. "Don't dress it up as concern." "Agnes, it's okay," I said quietly, though my heart was pounding with appreciation for her fierce defense. "Marcus, what exactly did you want to discuss that we haven't already covered?" Marcus glanced uncomfortably at Agnes, who showed no signs of leaving. "The power of attorney documents. I brought them with me so we can get this settled tonight. The sooner we have legal authority to manage your affairs, the sooner we can start making the necessary arrangements for your care." He pulled a manila folder from his briefcase, spreading papers across my kitchen table like he was conducting a business meeting. "I've prepared everything. You just need to sign here, here, and here, and we can move forward with confidence that your interests are being protected." Agnes leaned over the documents, scanning them with surprising thoroughness. "Margaret, do you understand what these papers say?" I looked at the legal language, dense and intimidating. "I assume they give Victoria and Marcus authority to make financial decisions on my behalf." "They give them authority to make every decision on your behalf," Agnes corrected, her voice grim. "Financial, medical, housing, everything. Once you sign these, you become a legal dependent. They can move your money, sell your possessions, change your living arrangements, even make medical decisions without consulting you." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Kowalski, you're not a lawyer. These are standard documents designed to protect elderly people from making decisions that might not be in their best interests." "Protect them from whom? From themselves? From making choices you don't approve of? From making the same kind of mistakes that created this crisis in the first place?" Marcus snapped, his professional facade finally cracking. "My mother trusted the wrong person with her money and lost everything. Now she's dependent on our support, but she's still acting like she has options she doesn't have. Someone needs to make rational decisions based on reality, not wishful thinking." The room fell silent except for the tick of my kitchen clock. Agnes looked at me with an expression that seemed to say, "This is your moment. Stand up for yourself or lose everything." But I found myself paralyzed, caught between the comfort of familiar dependence and the terrifying prospect of asserting independence I wasn't sure I actually possessed. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. Marcus's expression hardened. "Mom, we don't have time. The movers come tomorrow. Sunset Manor needs these documents to finalize your admission. Every day we delay costs money we don't have." "Then maybe?" Agnes said quietly. You need to ask yourself why you're in such a hurry to strip away your mother's rights. What are you afraid she might do if she has time to think clearly? It was a question that would haunt me long after Marcus left that night, taking his unsigned documents with him. A question that made me wonder what exactly my children thought they knew about Margaret Whitmore, and what they were so afraid I might remember about myself. Thursday morning arrived with the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. The movers had come early, 6:30 a.m. instead of the scheduled 9 so, and they were already knocking impatiently on my door before I'd even finished my morning coffee. "Moving day, ma'am," announced the crew chief, a burly man with tired eyes who'd clearly done this type of job too many times. "We've got 3 other stops today, so we need to get moving fast. Your daughter said to pack everything marked with blue tape for storage, everything with red tape for donation, and just 1 suitcase of personal items for you to take." I looked around my apartment in confusion. I hadn't marked anything with tape. Victoria and Derek must have come by yesterday evening after I'd gone to bed, making decisions about my possessions without bothering to consult me. Blue tape covered most of my furniture, Thomas's desk, our wedding china, the antique lamp that had belonged to my grandmother. Red tape marked almost everything else: books, photographs, decorative items, even some of my clothes. It was like walking through a crime scene where my entire life had been categorized and dismissed by strangers. "Wait," I said, as 2 movers started wrapping my grandmother's mirror in packing paper. "That mirror has been in my family for over 100 years. I can't just put it in storage indefinitely." "Lady, we just follow the tape system," the crew chief said without looking up from his clipboard. "You got questions about what goes where? You need to talk to whoever hired us. We're just here to move boxes." I called Victoria's number with shaking hands, but it went straight to voicemail. Same with Derek's phone. Marcus wasn't answering either. They'd deliberately made themselves unavailable during the actual execution of their plan, leaving me to deal with the emotional devastation alone. The movers worked with mechanical efficiency, dismantling my life room by room. They wrapped Thomas's military medals in newspaper like they were packing dishes. They loaded our wedding album into a box marked "Storage Miscellaneous," as if it were no different from old magazines. When I tried to rescue a small jewelry box that contained my mother's engagement ring, one of the movers gently but firmly took it from my hands. "Red tape, ma'am. Donation pile." "But that's my mother's ring. It's been in my family for generations." "I'm sorry, but we have strict instructions. Nothing marked red tape stays with you." I watched helplessly as they carried away pieces of my history, my identity, my connection to everyone I'd ever loved. Each box that disappeared through my door felt like another small death, another severing of the threads that connected me to my own life. Agnes appeared in my doorway around 8 a.m., taking in the chaos with obvious distress. "Margaret, what in God's name is happening here? They're packing everything." Victoria and Derek came by last night and marked everything while I was sleeping. My voice sounded strange and distant, like it was coming from someone else. Agnes surveyed the red and blue tape covering my belongings, her face darkening with anger. "They went through your personal possessions without permission, while you were asleep." "Margaret, that's not just disrespectful. It's illegal. You can call the police right now and stop this." But I couldn't seem to make myself move toward the phone. The magnitude of what was happening had overwhelmed my ability to process it. I stood in the middle of my dismantled living room, watching strangers carry away my entire existence, and felt completely powerless to stop it. "Ma'am, we need you to pack that suitcase now," the crew chief said, checking his watch. "We're already behind schedule, and your daughter said you need to be ready to leave by 10 now. Leave by 10 now." In less than 2 hours, I was supposed to walk out of this apartment forever, carrying 1 suitcase and leaving behind 71. Years of memories and connections. Agnes grabbed my arm firmly. "Margaret, listen to me. You don't have to do this. You can call Victoria right now and tell her you've changed your mind. You can tell these movers to stop and leave." "And then what?" Live in an empty apartment with no furniture and no money. To replace anything? Face eviction when I can't make rent? Then you figure something else out. But you do it on your own terms, not theirs. I looked around at what remained of my belongings. One suitcase worth of clothing, a few toiletries, and the small personal items Victoria had deemed appropriate for nursing home living. Everything that had made this place home was already gone or marked for disposal. The crew chief was getting impatient. "Ma'am, we really need to wrap this up. Your ride to the facility is supposed to be here at 10:15. My ride to the facility. They'd even arranged my transportation without asking what I preferred. I was being managed like a piece of cargo, transferred from one location to another, according to someone else's schedule. As I mechanically folded clothes into the single suitcase I was allowed to keep, I found myself thinking about the safe deposit box key hanging around my neck. The one Agnes had noticed, the one that represented 30 years of secrets even my own children didn't know about. Thomas had given me that key during his final hospital stay, when the cancer treatments had stopped working and we both knew our time was running short. "Margaret, there are some things you need to know," he'd whispered, pressing the small brass key into my palm. "Things I never told you because I wanted you to have a normal life, without worry or complications. But if something ever happens to me, if you ever find yourself in real trouble, you need to go to Meridian National Bank downtown, Box 247. Everything you need to know is in there." I'd asked him what he meant, but the morphine had kicked in and he'd drifted off to sleep. He died 2 days later, and in the chaos of grief and funeral arrangements, I'd never followed up on his cryptic instructions. The key had become just another connection to Thomas, something I wore close to my heart but never thought about practically. Over the years, I'd occasionally wondered what was in that box, but life had been comfortable enough that it never seemed urgent to find out. Thomas's pension, our savings, the house, everything had felt secure. The key remained my secret, a mystery I'd never bothered to solve. But now, as I watched the last remnants of my independent life disappear into moving boxes, that key felt heavier against my chest. Whatever Thomas had hidden in that box, he'd considered it important enough to tell me about in his final days. Important enough to ensure I'd always have access to it, even if I never used it. "Margaret, you look like you're about to pass out," Agnes said, appearing at my elbow with a glass of water. "When's the last time you ate anything?" I couldn't remember. Food had seemed impossible since Victoria's phone call, my stomach churning with anxiety and dread. The water Agnes offered tasted metallic, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the glass. "I think I'm having a panic attack," I admitted, sitting heavily on one of the few remaining chairs. "Honey, your body is trying to tell you something? This isn't right. What's happening to you isn't right, and some part of you knows it." A mover appeared in the doorway. "Ma'am, that's the last of it. We just need you to sign this inventory sheet and we're done." I looked at the paper he handed me, a list of my possessions reduced to impersonal descriptions. Dining table, wood, good condition. Photo albums, miscellaneous, 12 boxes. Wedding ring set, gold, vintage. They'd even inventoried my jewelry, itemizing pieces that carried decades of memories as if they were just assets to be cataloged. "The transport van is here," the crew chief announced. "Driver says you need to be ready in 5 minutes or they'll have to reschedule, and your daughter specifically said that wasn't an option." Wasn't an option. Nothing about this situation had been presented as optional. Every step had been presented as inevitable, as the only possible solution to my circumstances. But as I stood there in my empty apartment, clutching a suitcase that contained the pathetic remnants of my independent life, I felt something shifting inside me. Not acceptance. I was too angry for that. Not resignation. I was too proud for that. It was recognition. Recognition that I had been allowing other people to define my reality, to tell me what I could and couldn't afford, what I did and didn't deserve, what was and wasn't possible for someone in my situation. Agnes was right. My body was trying to tell me something. The panic, the nausea, the overwhelming sense of wrongness. It wasn't just grief over losing my belongings. It was my instincts screaming that I was about to make a terrible mistake. "Ma'am, we really need to go," the transport driver called from the hallway. I looked at Agnes, who was watching me with the intensity of someone witnessing a crucial moment. "What would you do, Agnes? If you were me, right now, what would you do?" "I'd tell them all to go to hell," she said without hesitation. "And then I'd figure out what I actually wanted to do with my life, instead of letting other people decide for me." The driver appeared in my doorway. "Mrs. Whitmore, we need to leave now or we'll miss your check-in time at Sunset Manor." I stood there, suitcase in one hand, my entire future hanging in the balance, and felt the weight of that brass key against my chest. 30 years of Thomas's secret, waiting for the moment when I might need it most. That moment had arrived. "I'm not going." The words came out of my mouth before I'd consciously decided to say them. The transport driver blinked at me in confusion, checking his paperwork as if he'd misheard. "Ma'am, I have you scheduled for Sunset Manor, 10:15 admission. Your daughter confirmed this morning." My daughter confirmed a lot of things without asking. "Me? I'm not going?" Agnes let out a sound that was half gasp, half cheer. The driver looked between us like he'd wandered into a family drama he wanted no part of. "Look, lady, I don't get paid enough to deal with this. If you're not coming, I need someone to call my dispatcher and explain why I'm going back empty." He pulled out his phone. "What's your daughter's number?" "Give me that phone," I said, surprising myself with the authority in my voice. The driver handed it over, probably relieved to pass the problem to someone else. Victoria answered on the second ring. "Hello? Is this about my mother's transport?" "This is your mother. And no, I'm not getting in that van." Silence. Then, "Mom, what are you talking about? Everything's arranged. Your room is ready, the paperwork is signed." "The paperwork isn't signed because I haven't signed it. And I'm not going to." "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You're obviously overwhelmed by the move. But this is what we discussed. This is the plan we all agreed on." "We never agreed on anything, Victoria. You made a plan and expected me to follow it. But I'm 71 years old, not 7. I can make my own decisions about where I want to live." The driver was shifting uncomfortably in my doorway, clearly wanting to escape this family confrontation. Agnes gestured for him to leave, and he gratefully disappeared down the hallway. "Mom, be reasonable. Where are you going to live? Your furniture is gone, your lease is up tomorrow, and you don't have money for rent anywhere else. What exactly is your alternative plan?" For a moment, the practical reality of my situation threatened to overwhelm my newfound resolve. Victoria was right about the logistics. I was standing in an empty apartment with one suitcase and no immediate housing options. But the weight of the key around my neck reminded me that there might be possibilities I hadn't explored yet. "I'll figure something out." "You'll figure something out?" "Mom, that's not a plan. That's denial. You're acting like someone who has resources and options when you don't." "Maybe I do have resources you don't know about." Another silence, longer this time. When Victoria spoke again, her voice had the sharp edge I recognized from her business. "Negotiations." "What resources?" "Mom, Marcus and I have been through your finances with a fine-tooth comb. We know exactly what you have and what you don't have. This magical thinking isn't helping anyone." The condescension in her voice, the assumption that she knew everything about my life, that I was some confused old woman living in fantasy, triggered something fierce inside me. "You've been through the finances you know about, Victoria, but there are things about your father and me that you never bothered to ask about, things that might surprise you." "Like what?" I found myself hesitating. 30 years of keeping Thomas's secret felt like a sacred trust, even now. But as I looked around my stripped apartment, at the evidence of how little my own children valued my autonomy and dignity, I realized that protecting their feelings was less important than protecting myself. Like the fact that your father was more than just a factory supervisor. Like the fact that there are assets you've never heard of because they were never part of our regular financial planning. Mom, you're scaring me. You're talking like someone who's having a breakdown. Please, just get in the van and we can discuss this calmly once you're settled at Sunset Manor. Agnes had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement. Now she stepped forward and held out her hand for the phone. Let me talk to her, she said quietly. I handed Agnes the phone, curious to see how this would play out. Victoria? This is Agnes Kowalski, your mother's neighbor. We met yesterday when your brother was here pressuring her to sign legal documents. No, I'm not interfering. I'm witnessing. And what I'm witnessing is elder abuse. Yes, I said abuse. You want to know what abuse looks like? It looks like grown children going through their mother's apartment while she's sleeping and marking her possessions for disposal without her consent. It looks like pressuring a 71-year-old woman to sign away her legal rights. It looks like rushing someone into a nursing home against their will because it's convenient for your budget. I could hear Victoria's voice rising on the other end of the line, but couldn't make out her words. No, young lady, you listen to me, Agnes continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd raised 6 children and buried 2 husbands. Your mother is standing here telling you she has resources you don't know about, and instead of asking questions or showing any curiosity, you're dismissing her like she's a confused child. Maybe the problem isn't that she doesn't have options. Maybe the problem is that you're so convinced you know everything about her life that you can't hear what she's trying to tell you. Agnes handed the phone back to me. She wants to talk to you. Victoria's voice was tight with anger and frustration. Mom, I don't know what Agnes has been telling you, but this is ridiculous. You're talking about mysterious assets that don't exist, refusing to accept help when you desperately need it, and listening to a neighbor instead of your own family. This isn't rational behavior. What would be rational, Victoria? Surrendering my independence because you've decided I don't deserve it anymore? Accepting that my only value to this family is staying out of your way and off your budget? That's not fair, and you know it. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, that's exactly what this looks like. You and Marcus have spent 6 months treating me like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. You've made decisions about my life, my belongings, my future without consulting me. And when I finally say no, you call it irrational. Mom, you lost everything to a con man. Everything. That's not our fault, but it is our reality. We're trying to find solutions that work within your actual circumstances. My actual circumstances include things you don't know about, Victoria. Things your father made sure I'd have access to if I ever needed them. What things? What are you talking about? I touched the key through my shirt, feeling its familiar weight against my skin. I'm talking about going to find out exactly what your father left for me before I make any more decisions about my future. Mom, please don't do anything rash. If there really are assets we don't know about, we can explore that together, as a family. But running off on some wild goose chase, instead of accepting the help we're offering, isn't the answer. The help you're offering comes with strings attached that I'm not willing to accept. Power of attorney, managed care, supervised living. That's not help, Victoria. That's control. It's protection. Protection from making more mistakes like the one that got you into this mess. Or protection for you from having to deal with a mother who might have more choices than you want her to have. The accusation hung in the air between us, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Victoria's voice came back, colder than I'd ever heard it. If you walk away from this arrangement, Mom, don't expect us to bail you out when whatever fantasy you're chasing turns out to be nothing. We've spent 6 months and thousands of dollars trying to help you, and if you want to throw that away for some delusion about secret money, that's your choice. But it's also your responsibility. I understand. Do you? Because once you refuse this placement, getting another one won't be easy. Sunset Manor was doing us a favor by accepting you on short notice. Other facilities have waiting lists, higher costs, stricter requirements. You're burning bridges you might need later. Then I guess I'd better make sure I don't need them. After I hung up, Agnes and I stood in my empty apartment, surrounded by the echo of the confrontation that had just changed everything. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but underneath the fear and uncertainty, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: the possibility of control over my own destiny. "Well," Agnes said finally, "that was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most foolish. I guess we're about to find out which." I pulled the key from around my neck for the first time in 3 years, holding it up to catch the morning light coming through my bare windows. "Agnes, would you mind giving me a ride downtown? I have a safe deposit box to open and 30 years of questions that need answers." Agnes grinned, the kind of smile that promised adventure and possibly trouble. "Honey, I thought you'd never ask." Meridian National Bank sat in the heart of downtown Millfield like a fortress from another era, all granite columns and brass fixtures that spoke of old money and older secrets. Agnes parked her ancient Buick in front of the building, studying the imposing facade with curiosity. "I've driven past this place 1,000 times," she said, "but I've never been inside. Looks like the kind of bank where they keep secrets for important people." My hands trembled as I clutched the small brass key that had hung around my neck for 30 years. Whatever Thomas had hidden in Box 247, he'd chosen the most secure, most discreet bank in the city to protect it. That alone suggested this was more significant than I'd ever imagined. The bank's interior was even more intimidating than its exterior: marble floors, mahogany paneling, and an atmosphere of hushed reverence for money and privacy. I approached, the reception desk feeling like an imposter in my worn cardigan and sensible shoes. "I need to access a safe deposit box," I told the impeccably dressed woman behind the counter. "Box 247. She looked up from her computer screen with the kind of polite attention that banks reserve for customers they haven't yet determined are worth their time. "Certainly, I'll need to see identification and verify your access authorization." I handed over my driver's license and the key, watching as she typed information into her system. Her expression shifted subtly as she read whatever appeared on her screen, transforming from polite disinterest to something approaching respect. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'll need you to provide additional identification verification for this particular account. Would you mind waiting while I contact our security department? Additional verification?" I'd never heard of such a thing for a simple safe deposit box. Agnes and I exchanged glances as we were directed to a private waiting area furnished with leather chairs and crystal water glasses. "Margaret, that woman just went from treating you like any other customer to acting like you're someone important," Agnes whispered. "What kind of box did Thomas rent here?" Before I could answer, a distinguished man in an expensive suit approached. "Us?" He had the silver hair and confident bearing of someone accustomed to handling significant financial matters. "Mrs. Whitmore? I'm James Harrison, Senior Vice President. It's an honor to finally meet you. We've been wondering when you might come to access Mr. Whitmore's arrangements." "Mr. Harrison, I'm not sure I understand. I just need to open a safe deposit box." His smile was warm, but carried an undercurrent of something I couldn't identify. "Mrs. Whitmore, Box 247 is much more than a simple safe deposit box. It's connected to a rather complex set of financial instruments that your late husband established. Would you mind coming to my office so we can discuss this privately?" Agnes squeezed my hand as we followed Mr. Harrison through a maze of corridors to an office that screamed serious money: oil paintings, Persian rugs, and a view of the city that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. "Mrs. Whitmore, before we proceed, I need to ask you some security questions to verify your identity. These are questions only you would know the answers to." The questions were oddly personal and specific. The name of my first pet, the hospital where Victoria was born, the date Thomas and I were married, the model of our first car, details that only someone who had lived my life intimately would know. Perfect, Mr. Harrison said after I'd answered correctly. Now, Mrs. Whitmore, I need to explain something that might come as quite a shock. Your husband didn't just rent a safe deposit box here. He established what we call a legacy trust account, with very specific instructions about when and how you were to be informed of its existence. A legacy trust account? Mr. Whitmore was quite explicit in his instructions. You were only to be told about this account if you came here voluntarily, using the key he gave you, and only if you came alone or with someone you trusted completely. He glanced at Agnes. He was very concerned that family members might pressure you into accessing these funds before you were ready or willing to do so. My heart was beating so fast I could barely focus on his words. What kind of funds are we talking about? Mr. Harrison opened a thick file folder, pulling out documents that looked far more complex than anything I'd expected. Mrs. Whitmore, your husband was an extraordinarily careful financial planner. What he presented as his regular job and standard. Retirement savings were only part of his financial activities. I don't understand. Thomas Whitmore wasn't just a factory supervisor. For over 20 years, he was also a silent partner in several real estate development ventures, a shareholder in 3 successful technology companies, and the beneficiary of a family trust that had been generating income since before you were married. The room seemed to tilt around me. That's impossible. Thomas worked at Patterson Manufacturing his entire career. We lived paycheck to paycheck for years. By choice, Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore's instructions specifically stated that he wanted you to live a normal middle-class life without the complications that significant wealth can bring to relationships and family dynamics. He felt that people treat you differently when they know you have money, and he wanted your children to grow up with strong work ethics and genuine character. Agnes was gripping my arm so tightly I could feel her fingernails through my cardigan. How much money are we talking about? She asked bluntly. Mr. Harrison consulted his papers carefully. As of this morning's valuation, the total value of all accounts, investments, and assets in Mrs. Whitmore's name is approximately $12.7 million. The silence that followed his words was so complete, I could hear the air conditioning humming and traffic sounds from the street below. Agnes made a small choking sound. I felt like I might faint. $12.7 million. Yes, ma'am. Your husband was quite successful in his various business ventures. The factory job was essentially his hobby, something he enjoyed. That also provided excellent cover for his other activities. I stared at the documents spread across Mr. Harrison's desk, trying to process information that seemed to rewrite everything I thought I knew about my life. Why didn't he tell me? Why keep it secret for 30 years? According to his notes, he planned to reveal everything when you both retired. He wanted you to be surprised with the news that you could travel, live anywhere you wanted, enjoy your golden years without financial worries. Unfortunately, his illness progressed more quickly than he anticipated. Mr. Harrison pulled out another document, this one bearing Thomas's handwriting. He left you a letter to be given to you when you accessed the account. Perhaps it will answer some of your questions. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope that bore my name in Thomas's familiar script. His words, written during those final hospital days when he'd given me the key, brought tears to my eyes immediately. My dearest Margaret, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means you've found yourself in circumstances that require the security I've tried to provide for you. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about this while I was alive. I always planned to surprise you with our true financial situation when we retired together. But life rarely follows our plans, does it? The letter went on to explain his business ventures, his reasons for secrecy, and his deep love for the life we'd built together. But it was the final paragraph that hit me like a physical blow. Margaret, I know you well enough to guess that you're probably in this bank because someone, probably our children, has made you feel like you have no choices, no power, no value beyond what you can provide for others. Please remember that you are worth so much more than that. You are wealthy in every sense of the word, and you never have to accept treatment that makes you feel otherwise. Use this money to live the life you deserve, and don't let anyone tell you what you can't afford or what you don't deserve. You've earned every penny of this through 30 years of love, sacrifice, and partnership. With all my love, Thomas. I wiped my eyes, aware that both Agnes and Mr. Harrison were watching me carefully. When I looked up, Agnes was staring at me with something approaching awe. "Margaret, honey, do you realize what this means?" I thought about Victoria's condescending voice on the phone, calling my situation irrational and threatening to abandon me if I didn't accept their charity. I thought about Marcus flying in from Denver to pressure me into signing away my legal rights. I thought about Derek cataloging my possessions like I was already dead. They had treated me like a burden, a problem, an inconvenience to be managed as cheaply and efficiently as possible. They had made me feel worthless, powerless, dependent on their grudging generosity. And all the while, I had been worth nearly $13 million. "Mr. Harrison," I said quietly, "I'm going to need to make some immediate arrangements, starting with a place to live that isn't Sunset Manor." His smile was understanding and professional. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think we can definitely help you with that. In fact, I think we can help you with quite a lot of things." As we began discussing the practical aspects of accessing my newfound wealth, I couldn't stop thinking about the phone call I was going to have to make. Victoria and Marcus thought they'd backed me into a corner, forced me to accept their terms because I had no alternatives. They were about to discover just how wrong they were about that, and about everything else. The next 3 hours at Meridian National Bank passed in a blur of paperwork, account transfers, and arrangements that would have seemed impossible that morning. Mr. Harrison's team moved with the efficiency of people accustomed to handling significant wealth, setting up immediate access to funds, arranging temporary credit lines, and scheduling meetings with investment advisors. By 2 p.m., I had a new checking account with $50,000 in immediately available funds, a platinum credit card with no preset, spending limit, and appointments scheduled with a tax attorney, a financial planner, and a real estate agent. The transformation from indigent nursing home candidate to high-net-worth client had taken less time than my daughter had given me to pack one suitcase. "Mrs. Whitmore," Mr. Harrison said as we concluded our business, "I want you to know that your husband specifically requested we provide you with comprehensive support during this transition. We have a wealth management team that specializes in helping clients navigate significant life changes. They're at your disposal whenever you're ready." Agnes had remained remarkably quiet during the financial discussions, but as we walked back to her car, she finally exploded with questions and observations. "Margaret, do you realize that you just went from being homeless to being richer than most small countries? Do you understand what just happened in there?" I climbed into Agnes's Buick, still clutching the portfolio of documents that proved my new reality. "I'm trying to process it, Agnes. This morning I thought I was completely powerless, and now I discover I've been wealthy for 30 years without knowing it." "Not just wealthy, honey. Wealthy enough to buy the entire nursing home they wanted, to stick you in. Wealthy enough to make your children's lives very, very uncomfortable if you choose to." The thought of Victoria and Marcus discovering my true financial situation sent a complex mix of emotions through me. Anger at how they'd treated me, satisfaction at their presumptions being so dramatically wrong, and something darker that I wasn't quite ready to name. "Agnes, can we go somewhere quiet where I can think? I need to process this before I do anything I might regret." Agnes drove us to Riverside Park, a peaceful spot overlooking the Millfield River where Thomas and I used to bring the children for picnics. We sat on a bench watching the water flow past, the enormity of my changed circumstances settling over me like a heavy blanket. "I keep thinking about this morning," I said finally. Victoria and Marcus were so confident they knew everything about my situation, so absolutely certain that I had no choices, no resources, no power to resist their plans. They treated you like you were already dead, Margaret. Like you were just a problem to be managed rather than a person with rights and dignity. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the missed calls I'd ignored during our time at the bank. 17 calls from Victoria, 12 from Marcus, and 6 from Derek. They'd clearly discovered that their transport van had returned empty and were panicking about the disruption to their carefully orchestrated plan. I should call them back, I said, though I made no move to do so. Should you? Or are you afraid to? Agnes's question cut straight to the heart of something I'd been avoiding. After 30 years of keeping Thomas's secret, after 6 months of accepting my children's financial control, after a lifetime of putting their needs before my own, the prospect of telling them the truth felt terrifying. They're going to be so angry, Agnes. They've spent months planning this move, arranging everything, and now I've blown up their entire plan. Their plan to put you in a nursing home against your will while you're worth $13 million? Yes, I imagine they'll be upset when they realize how badly they misjudged the situation. The way Agnes phrased it made the absurdity of my position clear. I was worried about disappointing children who had just tried to strip me of my independence and dignity because they thought I was broke. Children who had made financial decisions about my life without consulting me, who had gone through my possessions while I slept, who had treated my desperate situation as an inconvenience to their budgets. You know what the worst part is? I said, surprising myself with the bitterness in my voice. They didn't treat me badly because I was broke. They treated me badly because they thought I was powerless. The money doesn't change who they are or what they're capable of. Agnes nodded slowly. That's the real revelation here, isn't it? Not that you have money, but that your own children were willing to treat you so cruelly when they thought you couldn't fight back. My phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. Mom, please call us back. We're worried sick and need to know where you are and what's going on. This isn't like you. This isn't like you. She was right about that. The Margaret Whitmore who had meekly accepted their financial assistance for 6 months, who had allowed them to make decisions about her living arrangements, who had nearly signed away her legal rights, wasn't like the woman sitting on this park bench with enough money to buy and sell their entire suburban neighborhood. I need to see where they've taken my belongings, I said suddenly. Before I talk to them, I need to see what they did with my life. Agnes drove me to the Millfield self-storage facility where, according to the moving company paperwork, my furniture and possessions had been warehoused. The manager, a young man who clearly didn't expect to be dealing with storage unit visits on a Thursday afternoon, led us to Unit 47B. When he rolled up the metal door, I felt my heart break all over again. Everything that had made my apartment home was stacked carelessly in a concrete box, furniture wrapped in plastic, boxes labeled with impersonal descriptions, decades of memories reduced to an inventory list. Thomas's desk, where he'd paid our bills and planned our modest vacations, was pushed against one wall with a bicycle stacked on top of it. Our wedding china was packed in a box marked fragile that had clearly been dropped at least once. Photo albums documenting Victoria and Marcus's entire childhood were stacked in a corner like unwanted magazines. They packed up your entire life. Like you were never coming back, Agnes said quietly. I picked up one of the photo albums, flipping through pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, Little League games and school plays, images of myself as a young mother, exhausted but happy, giving everything I had to ensure my children felt loved and secure. The contrast between that devoted mother in the photographs and the inconvenient burden Victoria and Marcus saw today was so stark, it took my breath away. When had I stopped being a person they loved and become merely a problem they needed to solve? I want it all back, I said, my voice stronger than it had been all day. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every small thing they decided wasn't worth keeping. I want my life back. Agnes smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it felt like a smile of anticipation rather than sympathy. "Margaret, honey, I think you're finally ready to make some phone calls." As we drove back toward town, I found myself thinking about the conversation I was about to have with Victoria and Marcus. They expected to find a confused, frightened old woman who had wandered off in a moment of panic, but would eventually accept their rational plan for her care. Instead, they were about to meet a woman who could buy their houses outright, pay off their mortgages as pocket change, and fund their children's college educations without affecting her investment portfolio. A woman who had every legal right to demand respect and consideration, and now had the financial power to enforce those demands. The Margaret Whitmore who had cowered in that empty apartment this morning, clutching one pathetic suitcase while strangers carried away her history, was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood, perhaps for the first time in her adult life, exactly how much power she actually possessed. "Agnes," I said as we pulled into her driveway, "would you mind if I used your phone to make some calls? I think it's time to let my children know that their mother isn't quite the helpless burden they thought she was." Agnes handed me her cordless phone with a grin that promised fireworks. "Take all the time you need, honey. I'll make some popcorn. This is going to be better than anything on television." I sat in Agnes's cozy kitchen, staring at her cordless phone while she busied herself making tea and trying to pretend she wasn't dying of curiosity about what I was planning to say. The afternoon light was fading outside, and I knew Victoria and Marcus were probably beside themselves with worry and frustration by now. Good. Let them worry for once. Instead of calling my children immediately, I picked up the phone and dialed a different number, one that had been in my wallet for 6 months, but which I'd never had the courage to use. "FBI Financial Crimes Division, Agent Walsh speaking." "Agent Walsh, this is Margaret Whitmore. We've spoken several times about the Harold Pemberton case." "Mrs. Whitmore, yes, of course. Has there been a development in your case?" "In a manner of speaking, I've discovered that my financial situation is significantly different than I previously understood. I was wondering if this might affect the ongoing investigation or the recovery process." Agent Walsh was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you saying you've located additional assets that weren't part of Pemberton's fraud?" "I'm saying I've discovered that Harold Pemberton only had access to a small portion of my actual net worth. The $350,000 he stole, while significant, represents less than 3% of my total assets." Another pause. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think we need to have a conversation. This could significantly impact how we handle your case and any potential restitution." After arranging to meet with Agent Walsh the following morning, I hung up and felt a grim satisfaction. Harold Pemberton had stolen my money betting that I was just another vulnerable elderly woman with limited resources and no ability to fight back. He was about to discover that assumption had been spectacularly wrong. Agnes set a cup of tea in front of me, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Who are you calling next?" "Sunset Manor. I want to understand exactly what arrangements my children made on my behalf." The conversation with Sunset Manor's administrator was enlightening. Victoria and Derek had indeed put down a deposit and signed paperwork guaranteeing payment for my care. They'd also provided detailed medical information, dietary requirements, and behavioral assessments that painted me as a confused, dependent elderly woman who needed significant supervision. "Mrs. Whitmore," the administrator said, "your family was very concerned about your mental state. They indicated you'd been making irrational financial decisions and were having difficulty managing your daily affairs." Irrational financial decisions. They'd characterized my victimization by Harold Pemberton as evidence of mental incompetence, creating a paper trail that could have been used to justify guardianship proceedings if I'd resisted their plans. "I see. And what would happen if I chose not to take the placement you've prepared?" "Well, your family would forfeit the deposit, of course, and they'd still be liable for the first month's charges since the bet has been reserved. But Mrs. Whitmore, I should mention that your family stressed how important this placement was for your safety and well-being. How much are we talking about in terms of their financial liability? The deposit was $3,000, and the first month's charges would be $1,650. So they'd be out $4,650 total. I thought about Victoria's concern over the $800 monthly rent she'd been paying for my apartment, how that amount had been such a burden on their budget that they'd needed to find a cheaper alternative. Now they were committed to paying nearly 6 times that amount for a nursing home placement I didn't want. I understand. Thank you for your time. Next, I called the moving company. The conversation with their dispatcher was brief but informative. Mrs. Whitmore? Yeah, we got your stuff in storage. Your daughter said you might be calling to change the arrangements. She seemed pretty upset when she called earlier. What exactly did she tell you? Said there'd been a family emergency and you might need to access your belongings before the scheduled delivery to the nursing home. She wanted to know if we could hold everything indefinitely or if we needed a new delivery address. So Victoria was already trying to manage the situation, probably hoping I'd come to my senses and accept their plan. She had no idea how dramatically the game had changed. I'll be in touch about new arrangements, I told the dispatcher. Please don't release anything to anyone without my direct authorization. Now came the moment I'd been building toward. I dialed Victoria's number and waited for her to answer. Mom! Oh, thank God, where have you been? We've been calling for hours. The transport driver said you refused to get in the van, and then no one could reach you. We've been worried sick. Hello, Victoria. I'm fine. I'm at my neighbor Agnes's house. Mom, what happened this morning? Why didn't you go to Sunset Manor? Everyone was expecting you. And now there's this whole mess with scheduling and deposits. I decided I didn't want to live in a nursing home. Mom, we've been through this. You don't have a choice. Your apartment is empty, your lease is up tomorrow, and you don't have anywhere else to go. Actually, Victoria, I do have somewhere else to go. Several somewheres, as it turns out. A pause. What does that mean? It means that my financial situation is quite different than you and Marcus believed. Mom, please don't start with the mysterious assets thing again. We've been through your finances completely. Marcus and I know exactly what you have and don't have. Do you? Tell me, Victoria, what do you know about Meridian National Bank? Another pause. Longer this time. I've never heard of it. Why? Because that's where I spent this afternoon learning about financial arrangements your father made that you and Marcus never knew existed. What kind of arrangements? I could hear the uncertainty creeping into Victoria's voice, the first crack in her confident assumption that she understood my situation completely. The kind that mean I'm not broke, Victoria. Not even close. Mom, you're scaring me. You're talking like someone who's having some kind of breakdown. Whatever you think you discovered today, we need to discuss it as a family before you make any decisions. The way we discussed moving me into a nursing home, the way we discussed selling my jewelry and donating my belongings, the way we discussed me signing over power of attorney, that's different. Those were decisions that needed to be made quickly, and you weren't in a mental state to what? To resist being treated like a piece of property? To object to having my life dismantled without my consent? Agnes was watching this conversation with fascination, occasionally nodding approvingly at my responses. Victoria, let me ask you something. If you discovered that I actually had significant financial resources that would make your assistance unnecessary, how would that change your attitude toward my living arrangements? Mom, that's a hypothetical that doesn't help anyone. The reality is that I'm worth approximately $12.7 million. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Victoria, are you there? Mom, that's not possible. It's not only possible, it's documented fact. Your father was far more successful financially than either of us ever knew. He left me very well provided for $12 million, $12.7 million, as of this morning's market valuation. I could hear Victoria breathing, but she wasn't speaking. In the background, I caught the sound of Derek's voice asking what was wrong. Victoria, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to retrieve my belongings from storage and find somewhere appropriate to live. I'm going to take control of my own financial affairs. And I'm going to decide for myself what kind of relationship I want to have with children who thought so little of me that they were willing to warehouse me in a nursing home to save $800 a month. Mom, wait. Please. Let's talk about this. If what you're saying is true. If what I'm saying is true? Victoria, an hour ago you were certain I was broke and had no options. Now that I'm telling you otherwise, you want to talk about it? What exactly do we need to discuss? We need to discuss why you let us think you were indigent. We need to discuss why you accepted our help for 6 months if you had millions of dollars. We need to discuss what this means for our family. What it means for our family is that you're about to learn the difference between loving someone and managing them. What it means is that you're going to have to earn my respect instead of assuming you're entitled to it. I could hear Derek's voice, getting louder in the background, clearly demanding to know what was happening. Mom, please don't do anything rash. Can we meet somewhere and talk face to face? This is too important to handle over the phone. Victoria, I've spent 6 months being grateful for scraps of attention from children who saw me as a burden. I've spent this morning being treated like incompetent cargo to be shipped off to institutional care. I think I've been patient enough. What do you want from us? The question hung in the air, and for the first time in our conversation, Victoria sounded genuinely uncertain. Not angry, not condescending, but actually curious about what I might need or want. I want to be treated like a person whose thoughts and feelings matter. I want to be consulted about decisions that affect my life. I want to be valued for who I am, not managed like a problem to be solved. And if we can do that, then maybe we can rebuild a relationship based on mutual respect instead of your assumptions about my helplessness. After I hung up, Agnes was staring at me with something approaching awe. Margaret, I have never in my life heard someone flip a script that completely. You just went from being their charity case to being their worst nightmare. I looked out Agnes's kitchen window at the evening shadows growing longer, thinking about the children I'd raised and the adults they'd become. Tomorrow, everything would be different. But tonight, for the first time in 6 months, I felt like myself again. The next morning, I woke up in Agnes's guest bedroom feeling more rested than I had in months. For the first time since Harold Pemberton's disappearance, I wasn't worried about money, wasn't dependent on anyone else's schedule or approval, and wasn't powerless to control my own circumstances. My phone had been buzzing all night with calls and texts from Victoria, Marcus, and Derek, but I'd turned it off after 10 p.m. They could wait. They'd made me wait 6 months for basic respect and consideration. They could manage 12 hours of uncertainty about my intentions. Agnes knocked on my door at 8 a.m. with a cup of coffee and a newspaper. Good morning, millionaire. Sleep well? Better than I have in ages. Agnes, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. Honey, I haven't done anything except watch you remember who you are. But I have to ask, what's your plan now? You've got them running scared, but what comes next? Before I could answer, there was a sharp knock at Agnes's front door. Through the window, I could see Victoria's car in the driveway, with both Victoria and Derek standing on the porch looking like they'd barely slept. Well, Agnes said with amusement, looks like they couldn't wait for you to call them back. I took my time getting dressed, brushing my hair, and finishing my coffee before answering the door. Victoria looked haggard, her usually perfect appearance, showing signs of a very difficult night. Mom, we need to talk. Please. Good morning, Victoria. Derek. You're up early? We've been up all night trying to understand what happened yesterday. Mom, if what you told me on the phone is true, then we've made some serious mistakes, and we need to figure out how to fix them. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd heard from Victoria in months, though it was carefully phrased to avoid actually admitting wrongdoing. "Would you like to come in? Agnes, is it all right if we use your living room?" Agnes nodded graciously, though I could see she was planning to stay within earshot of whatever conversation was about to unfold. Victoria and Derek sat stiffly on Agnes's sofa, both looking like they were attending a business meeting they couldn't afford to lose. Derek kept checking his phone, probably calculating how much money they'd already committed to arrangements that were now completely unnecessary. "Mom," Victoria began carefully, "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I realize that we may have made some assumptions about your situation that weren't entirely accurate." "What kind of assumptions?" "We assumed that when Harold Pemberton stole your retirement money, he took everything you had. We assumed you were completely dependent on our financial support. We assumed you needed us to make decisions for you because you weren't capable of handling complex financial matters." Derek shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to move past the acknowledgement phase and get to the practical questions about money. "And now?" I asked. "Now we're wondering if those assumptions were wrong. And if they were wrong, then some of the decisions we made might have been inappropriate." Inappropriate. She still couldn't bring herself to use words like cruel or disrespectful or abusive. "Victoria, let me ask you something. If you'd known yesterday morning that I had significant financial resources, would you still have tried to move me into Sunset Manor?" She exchanged a glance with Derek before answering. "If you had the means to live independently and maintain your dignity, then no. Of course not. So the only reason you thought a nursing home was appropriate was because you believed I was broke?" "We thought it was the only option that made financial sense." "For whom?" "Financial sense for whom?" Another uncomfortable pause. "For everyone involved, including me. We thought it was the best we could provide given the circumstances." I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse or understanding. What I saw instead was calculation. She was trying to figure out how to manage this new situation to her advantage, just like she'd managed the old situation. "Victoria, I want you to think very carefully about your answer to this next question, because it's going to determine what kind of relationship we have going forward." She nodded nervously. "Do you think the way you treated me over the past 6 months, and especially this week, was acceptable? Not whether it was financially necessary, not whether you thought it was for my own good, but whether it was the right way to treat another human being." Derek started to speak, but Victoria held up a hand to stop him. For a long moment, she stared at her hands folded in her lap. "No," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, it wasn't acceptable." "What specifically wasn't acceptable?" "Making decisions about your life without consulting you. Going through your belongings while you were sleeping. Pressuring you to sign legal documents. Treating you like you were incompetent instead of someone who'd been victimized by a criminal." It was more honesty than I'd expected from Victoria, though I suspected it was motivated more by fear of losing access to my newly revealed wealth than by genuine remorse. "And Derek, do you agree with Victoria's assessment?" Derek looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. "Mrs. Whitmore, we were trying to help. Everything we did was because we were worried about you and wanted to make sure you were safe and cared for." "Derek, I didn't ask about your intentions. I asked whether you think the way you treated me was acceptable." He glanced at Victoria, clearly hoping she'd rescue him from having to answer directly. When she didn't, he sighed heavily. "Looking back, maybe we could have handled things differently. Maybe we should have asked more questions instead of making assumptions. Maybe. Could have. Should have." Still deflecting responsibility even when confronted with the evidence of their behavior. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice taking on the authority I'd discovered I possessed. "I'm going to retrieve my belongings from storage and find appropriate housing. I'm going to take control of my own financial affairs and my own decision-making. And I'm going to decide what kind of contact I want with family members who've shown me how they treat people they think are powerless. Mom, what does that mean for us? Victoria asked, and for the first time she sounded genuinely frightened. It means you're going to have to earn your way back into my life. You're going to have to prove that you can treat me with respect when I don't need your help, not just when you think I do. Derek finally found his voice. Mrs. Whitmore, about the nursing home deposit and the first month's payment. What about it? Well, we're committed to paying over $4,000 for a placement you're not going to use. With our budget situation, Victoria shot him a sharp look, clearly mortified that he was asking her recently discovered millionaire mother for money after trying to put her in a nursing home the day before. Derek, are you asking me to reimburse you for expenses you incurred without my consent as part of a plan I never agreed to? I just thought. You thought that now that you know I have money, I should pay for the mistakes you made when you thought I didn't have money. The silence that followed was deafening. Agnes, who had been listening from the kitchen, appeared in the doorway with a satisfied expression. Boys and girls, she said cheerfully, I think we're learning some valuable lessons about counting chickens before they hatch. Victoria turned back to me with desperate eyes. Mom, what do we need to do to fix this? What do you want from us? I want you to think about that question for a while. I want you to really consider what it would look like to have a relationship with me based on respect instead of obligation or financial benefit. And when you think you have an answer, you can call me. Where will you be staying? Somewhere appropriate to my actual circumstances instead of the circumstances you assumed I had. As they left, Victoria paused at the door. Mom, I love you. I hope you know that. Victoria, people who love you don't inventory your belongings like you're already dead. They don't try to strip away your legal rights. They don't make you feel worthless and burdensome. Love isn't just a feeling you have. It's a way you behave. And your behavior has not been loving. After they left, Agnes brought me another cup of coffee and settled into her favorite chair. Well, that was satisfying to watch. How do you feel? Like I'm just getting started, I said, pulling out my phone to call the real estate agent Mr. Harrison had recommended. Agnes, do you want to come house hunting with me? I think it's time Margaret Whitmore found somewhere to live that reflects who she actually is. 3 months later, I stood in the sunroom of my new home, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across Millfield's most exclusive neighborhood. The house Agnes and I had found was everything the cramped apartment had not been: spacious, elegant, and surrounded by gardens that reminded me daily that I had choices about how to spend my time and energy. The real estate agent had initially tried to show me age-appropriate properties, small condominiums with minimal maintenance requirements and proximity to medical facilities. Her assumption that a 71-year-old woman would want to downsize had lasted exactly until I'd written a cash offer for a $2.3 million colonial estate that had been on the market for 8 months. Mrs. Whitmore, she'd said, barely concealing her amazement. Most of my clients your age are looking to simplify their living arrangements. Most of your clients my age probably haven't just discovered they're worth $13 million, I'd replied, enjoying the way her expression shifted from condescension to reverence in real time. The house had become more than just a place to live. It was a statement about who Margaret Whitmore actually was when she had the freedom to make her own choices. I'd hired an interior designer, not because I needed help choosing furniture, but because I wanted the experience of being consulted about my preferences instead of having other people make decisions for me. Agnes had become a frequent visitor, often staying in one of the guest bedrooms when her own house felt too quiet. Her friendship had evolved from neighborly concern into genuine partnership in what she called my revenge tour, though I preferred to think of it as my authenticity project. This morning's sunrise was particularly beautiful because it marked exactly 90 days since I'd walked out of my empty apartment and discovered the truth about my circumstances. 90 days since Victoria and Marcus had learned that their assumptions about power and dependence had been catastrophically wrong. The relationship with my children had been complicated. Marcus had flown back from Denver 2 days after the confrontation at Agnes's house, arriving with a briefcase full of legal documents and a carefully prepared speech about family financial planning. He'd clearly spent the flight researching strategies for high-net-worth estate management, transforming, overnight, from the son who'd called me indigent into a legal advisor eager to help manage my newfound wealth. "Mom, we need to discuss tax implications and investment strategies," he'd said during our first meeting at my new house. "With assets of this magnitude, there are estate planning considerations that require immediate attention. Marcus, do you notice what you're doing right now? I'm trying to help you protect your financial interests. You're trying to manage my money the same way you tried to manage my living arrangements. You're assuming I need your expertise instead of asking whether I want it." The conversation that followed had been painful, but necessary. Marcus struggled to understand why I wasn't grateful for his legal knowledge, why I'd hired my own financial advisors instead of relying on his guidance, why I seemed more interested in his apology than his professional services. "I said I was sorry about the nursing home thing," he'd protested. "We were operating with incomplete information. Now that we know the full picture, we can make better decisions." "Marcus, the information you were missing wasn't about my bank account. It was about treating me like a human being whose feelings and preferences mattered. Money doesn't change that." It had taken 6 weeks of difficult conversations before Marcus began to understand the difference between helping me manage my wealth and trying to control my choices. The breakthrough came when he finally stopped talking about what I should do with my money and started asking what I wanted to do with my life. Victoria's journey had been more complex. The woman who'd tried to warehouse me in a nursing home had initially attempted to rebuild our relationship through grand gestures, expensive gifts, elaborate dinner invitations, and carefully orchestrated family gatherings designed to demonstrate her newfound respect for my circumstances. But authentic respect, I'd learned, couldn't be performed. It had to be earned through consistent behavior over time. The turning point came when Victoria showed up at my house one evening without Derek, without an agenda, and without the polished presentation she'd been practicing for weeks. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you respond." I'd set down my book and given her my full attention. "I've been going to therapy since that day at Agnes's house. Not because you asked me to, but because I couldn't sleep knowing how I'd treated you, and my therapist helped me understand something that I didn't want to face." She'd paused, gathering courage for what came next. "The way I treated you wasn't really about money. It was about power. I liked feeling needed and important, liked being the one who made decisions and solved problems. When you became financially dependent, it gave me permission to treat you the way I'd always secretly wanted to, like you worked for me instead of the other way around." The honesty of that admission had taken my breath away. "I spent 30 years being grateful that you sacrificed everything for Marcus and me, but I never really respected you for it. I saw your selflessness as weakness instead of strength. And when you needed help, I treated you the way I thought weak people deserved to be treated." Victoria had been crying by then, the kind of tears that come from genuine recognition rather than manipulation. "I don't know if you can forgive me for that. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know that I see you now. Really see you. In a way I never did before. And I'm ashamed of the person I was when I thought you were powerless." That conversation had been the beginning of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial convenience or family obligation. The changes extended beyond my immediate family. Word had spread through Millfield about Margaret Whitmore's dramatic transformation from nursing home candidate to wealthy widow, and the shift in how people treated me was both illuminating and disturbing. Suddenly, I was invited to charity galas I'd never heard of. Business owners who'd barely acknowledged my existence when I shopped in their stores now greeted me by name and inquired about my comfort. Medical professionals who'd kept me waiting for hours during my modest circumstances now saw me immediately and asked detailed questions about my satisfaction with their services. The contrast was so stark, it might have been comical if it weren't, so revealing about human nature and social dynamics. But the most meaningful changes were smaller and more personal. Agnes and I had established a weekly tradition of trying new restaurants, traveling to nearby cities, and taking art classes together. For the first time in decades, I was making choices based on what interested me rather than what was expected of me. I'd also begun reaching out to other elderly people who were being marginalized or mistreated by their families. Through my lawyer, I'd established a foundation focused on elder advocacy and financial abuse prevention. The irony that Harold Pemberton's theft had led to my discovering resources that allowed me to help other victims wasn't lost on me. This morning, as I finished my coffee and prepared for another day of living life on my own terms, my phone rang with a call from Victoria. "Mom, I know it's early, but I wanted to catch you before your day got started. Emma has a soccer game this Saturday, and she specifically asked if Grandma could come watch. Not because we need anything, not because we're trying to impress you, but because she misses spending time with you." It was exactly the kind of invitation I'd been hoping for, one focused on genuine connection rather than financial convenience. "I'd love to come, Victoria. What time?" 10 a.m. at the high school. "And Mom?" "Thank you for giving us the chance to learn how to love you better." As I hung up the phone, I realized that the woman who'd nearly been shipped off to Sunset Manor 3 months ago was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood her own worth, demanded respect, and had the resources to enforce her boundaries. Margaret Whitmore had finally learned the difference between being needed and being valued, between sacrifice and self-respect, between family obligation and genuine love. And at 71 years old, she was just getting started. 1 year later, I stood before an audience of 300 people at the Millfield Community Center, preparing to deliver a speech I never could have imagined giving when this journey began. The banner behind me read, "Elder Rights Awareness Conference, Finding Your Voice at Any Age." And in the front row sat Agnes, Victoria, Marcus, and several other families whose lives had been changed by what we now called the Margaret Whitmore story. "My name is Margaret Whitmore," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. 18 months ago, I thought I was a broke, powerless widow whose only value to her family was staying quiet and out of the way. Today, I want to tell you how discovering the truth about my circumstances changed not just my bank account, but my understanding of what I deserve as a human being. The audience leaned forward, and I could see my own past reflected in many of their faces. Elderly people who'd been conditioned to accept whatever treatment their families offered, to be grateful for scraps of attention, to believe that needing help meant surrendering all control over their lives. "But this story isn't really about money," I continued. "It's about the difference between being used and being valued, between being managed and being respected, between surviving and actually living. The fortune I discovered was life-changing, but the self-respect I found was life-saving." I told them about that terrible Tuesday phone call, about standing in my empty apartment with one suitcase, about the moment I chose to trust my instincts over my children's assumptions. I told them about Agnes's fierce friendship, about Thomas's 30-year secret, about the devastating discovery that my own children had been willing to treat me cruelly because they thought I couldn't fight back. "The hardest part wasn't learning I was wealthy," I said, looking directly at Victoria, who was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "The hardest part was accepting that my children's love had been conditional on their perception of my powerlessness. Real love doesn't disappear when someone gains the ability to say no." In the month since our family's transformation, Victoria and Marcus had become advocates themselves. Victoria had started a support group for adult children who recognized patterns of elder exploitation in their own behavior. Marcus had begun providing pro bono legal services to elderly clients facing financial abuse. Both of them spoke regularly about the importance of treating elderly parents as whole people, rather than burdens to be managed. "Mom changed all of us," Victoria had said during a recent interview with the local newspaper. "She taught us that respect isn't something you give to people when they have money or power. It's something you give to people because they're human beings who deserve dignity." We almost lost her because we forgot that basic truth. The foundation I'd established had grown beyond anything I'd initially envisioned. The Whitmore Center for Elder Advocacy now employed 12 full-time staff members, operated a crisis hotline for elderly people facing family exploitation, and had helped over 400 families navigate difficult conversations about aging, independence, and respect. Dr. Jennifer Kim, the geriatric psychologist who now served as the foundation's clinical director, had developed what she called the Whitmore Protocol, a framework for helping families establish healthy boundaries around elder care that preserved dignity while addressing practical needs. Too often, Dr. Kim explained during our monthly board meetings, families approach aging from a crisis management perspective. They wait until someone appears helpless and then swoop in with solutions that strip away autonomy. Margaret's story teaches us that prevention is better than rescue and respect is better than management. But perhaps the most meaningful change had been in my relationship with my grandchildren. Emma, now a senior in high school, had written her college application essay about her grandmother's transformation and what it taught her about standing up for herself. James, Marcus's youngest, had started visiting me every other weekend. Not because his parents made him, but because he genuinely enjoyed our conversations about books and history and what he wanted to do with his life. "Grandma," Emma had said, "during our last visit, I used to think you were just this quiet old lady who made good cookies. Now I realize you're like this total badass who taught our whole family how to be better people." Badass. At 72 years old, I'd apparently become a badass. Agnes, now 79 and thriving in the guest wing of my house, had become something of a local celebrity herself. Her story of fierce friendship and truth-telling had inspired other elderly people to become advocates for their peers. She'd started what she called Truth-Telling Tuesday, a weekly gathering where elderly residents of Millfield came together to share their experiences and support each other in demanding better treatment from their families. Margaret didn't just save herself, Agnes told a reporter last month. She gave the rest of us permission to save ourselves, too. The ripple effects continued to spread in unexpected directions. Sunset Manor had implemented new policies requiring family members to demonstrate financial responsibility before making placement decisions on behalf of relatives. The local FBI office now used my case as a training example for investigating financial crimes against the elderly. 3 other financial advisory firms in the state had voluntarily submitted to enhanced oversight after Harold Pemberton's conviction sent shockwaves through the industry. Harold himself had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to his victims. The irony that his theft of my retirement savings had led to the discovery of my actual wealth, which then funded efforts to prevent similar crimes, wasn't lost on anyone involved in the case. As I concluded my speech at the conference, I looked out at the faces in the audience. Some determined, some fearful, some hopeful, all of them recognizing pieces of their own stories in mine. "I want to leave you with this thought," I said. "You don't have to wait for a crisis to demand respect. You don't have to be wealthy to have worth. You don't have to prove your value to people who should love you unconditionally. And you're never too old to change the story of your life." The standing ovation that followed was gratifying, but not as meaningful as the conversation I overheard afterward between an elderly man and his middle-aged daughter. "Dad, I had no idea you felt that way about the decisions we've been making," the daughter was saying. "Why didn't you tell us you wanted to stay in your house?" "Because I thought you knew better than I did what was best for me," he replied. But listening to Mrs. Whitmore, I realized that nobody knows better than I do what will make me happy. That evening, as Agnes and I sat in our garden watching the sunset, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. 18 months ago, I'd been a woman who'd forgotten her own worth, who'd accepted scraps and called them love, who'd nearly allowed herself to be discarded because it was convenient for other people. Agnes, do you ever think about how different things would be if I'd just gotten in that van? Agnes was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. You'd be dead, Margaret. Maybe not physically, but everything that makes you who you are would be gone, and the rest of us would have lost the chance to learn from your courage. As night fell over Millfield, I thought about Thomas and the secret he'd kept for 30 years, waiting for the moment when I might need the security he'd provided. He'd given me more than money. He'd given me the power to choose my own future when I finally had the courage to claim it. The Margaret Whitmore who'd answered that terrible phone call from Victoria was gone forever. In her place was a woman who understood that respect is not negotiable, that love should enhance rather than diminish, and that it's never too late to discover who you really are when you have the freedom to choose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to advocate for dignity and respect, new chances to remind the world that elderly people are not problems to be solved, but human beings to be valued. But tonight, in my beautiful home surrounded by friends who saw my worth, I was simply grateful to be living proof that sometimes the most important discovery isn't money in the bank. It's the power you've had all along to demand the treatment you deserve. The best part of my story isn't that I turned out to be rich. The best part is that I turned out to be strong enough to use that richness to change not just my own life, but the lives of everyone around me. And at 72 years old, I was just getting started. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.